What if I told you that the slogan, "No Kings," is not new, but 2,500 years old? From ancient Athens to modern America, humans have always feared one thing: absolute power. Millions are chanting "No Kings" today, but this idea began long before modern democracy even existed. Introduction: Why no kings still matters. In recent years, the slogan "No Kings" has re-emerged as a powerful expression of democratic resistance, particularly in the United States. While it may seem like a contemporary political response, the phrase carries a deep historical resonance. It encapsulates a long-standing human anxiety about concentrated power, about the fear that any ruler, however elected or justified, might become absolute. This video explores the intellectual and political genealogy of such resistance, tracing it from ancient Greece to modern protest movements, and examining how literature has continually reflected, shaped, and challenged the idea of authority. What we find is not merely a series of isolated revolts, but a continuous tradition of questioning power itself. Ancient Greece, the birth of anti-tyranny thought. The origins of anti-authoritarian protest can be traced back to ancient Greece, particularly in the political life of Athens during the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. The Greeks did not initially view tyranny as inherently negative. The term tyrannos simply referred to a sole ruler or an absolute ruler. However, over time, it came to signify illegitimate and oppressive authority. The overthrow of tyrants such as Hippias in Athens marked a crucial turning point. Under reformers like Cleisthenes, Athens began to experiment with the democratic structures that distributed power among citizens. What is significant here is not merely the political transition, but the conceptual shift. Authority was no longer seen as divinely ordained or naturally inherited, but as something that required public consent. Mechanisms like ostracism allowed citizens to exile individuals deemed too powerful, institutionalizing resistance itself. In this sense, ancient Greece laid the philosophical groundwork for the idea that no individual should hold unchecked power, a principle that echoes strongly in modern "no kings" rhetoric. The Roman Republic, institutionalizing the rejection of kingship. If the Greeks theorized resistance, the Romans institutionalized it. The founding myth of the Roman Republic begins with the expulsion of the last king, Tarquin the Proud, in 509 BCE. From that moment onward, Roman political identity was defined by a profound distrust of monarchy. The very term rex, meaning king, became politically taboo. This anti-monarchical sentiment was not merely symbolic. It shaped the entire structure of Roman governance. Power was distributed among elected officials, and checks and balances were embedded into the system. Even the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE was justified by conspirators as an act of defending the republic against the threat of monarchy. Though the outcome ultimately led to imperial rule, the ideological commitment to no kings remained a defining feature of Roman political thought. Medieval constraints limiting the king. Moving into the medieval period, we see a shift from outright rejection of kingship to efforts aimed at limiting it. One of the most significant developments in this regard was the Magna Carta of 1215 in England. Forced upon King John by rebellious barons, this document established the principle that the monarch was subject to the law. This moment is crucial because it marks the beginning of constitutionalism, the idea that authority must operate within a legal framework. While kings continued to rule, their power was no longer absolute. The seeds of modern democratic governance were thus sown not through the abolition of monarchy but through its restriction. Early modern revolutions, the crisis of divine right. The early modern period witnessed a dramatic escalation in resistance to monarchical authority. The English Civil War in the 17th century culminated in the execution of King Charles I, an event that fundamentally challenged the doctrine of the divine right of kings. For the first time in European history, a monarch was publicly tried and executed by his own subjects. This was followed by the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which established a constitutional monarchy and affirmed the supremacy of Parliament. Thinkers like John Locke provided the philosophical justification for these developments, arguing that governments derive their legitimacy from the consent of the governed. If a ruler fails to protect the rights of the people, Locke argued, rebellion is not only justified but necessary. Enlightenment and Revolution. The people as sovereign. The 18th century saw these ideas reach their most radical expression. The American Revolution explicitly rejected monarchy, framing independence as a break from tyrannical rule. The Declaration of Independence asserted that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, transforming a philosophical idea into a political doctrine. The French Revolution went even further. The execution of King Louis XVI symbolized the complete dismantling of monarchical authority. Influenced by thinkers like Jean Locke and Rousseau, revolutionaries redefined sovereignty as residing entirely in the people. The slogan, "No Kings," thus evolved into a broader assertion that political authority must always be accountable, participatory, and subject to the will of the people. Modern protest movements reimagining the king. In the modern era, the figure of the king has become increasingly metaphorical. 20th and 21st century protest movements rarely target literal monarchs. Instead, they challenge systems of power that function in similarly and unaccountable ways. The civil rights movement in the United States, anti-colonial struggles in Asia and Africa, and more recent uprisings such as the Arab Spring all reflect a shared demand for dignity, representation, and justice. The contemporary "No Kings" protest in the United States must be understood within this broader context. They are not simply reactions to individual leaders, but expressions of a deeper concern about the concentration of power in executive institutions. The slogan functions as a symbolic rejection of any form of governance that resembles monarchy in its lack of accountability. Literature as resistance, classical foundations. Literature has played a crucial role in articulating and disseminating these ideas. In classical Greek tragedy, for instance, Sophocles' Antigone explores the conflict between individual conscience and state authority. The protagonist defies King Creon's governance, asserting a moral law that transcends political power. Similarly, Plato's Republic offers a philosophical critique of tyranny, presenting it as the most degraded form of governance. These works do not merely reflect political realities, they actively shape the way societies think about authority and resistance. Early modern and revolutionary literature. During the early modern and revolutionary periods, literature became more explicitly political. William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar dramatizes the tension between republican ideals and authoritarian ambition. John Milton's Areopagitica defends freedom of expression against state control, while Thomas Paine's Common Sense directly attacks the institution of monarchy, calling it irrational and unjust. In these texts, literature functions as a form of political intervention, mobilizing public opinion and legitimizing resistance. Romantic and modern literary visions. The Romantic period further expanded the emotional and ethical dimensions of protest. Percy Bysshe Shelley's The Mask of Anarchy, written in response to the Peterloo massacre, calls for non-violent resistance against oppressive authority. Victor Hugo's Les Miserables portrays insurrection as a moral imperative rooted in compassion and justice. In the 20th century, dystopian literature reimagines the king as an abstract system. George Orwell's 1984 and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale depict societies where power is pervasive, invisible, and totalizing. These works warn that authoritarianism can exist even without a crown. Post-colonial and critical perspectives. In post-colonial literature and theory, the focus shifts to more subtle forms of domination. Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth examines the psychological and political dimensions of colonial rule, advocating for revolutionary resistance. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak's essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, interrogates the structures that silence marginalized voices. Here, the idea of no kings expands beyond political systems to include cultural, epistemic, and ideological forms of power. Authority is no longer located in a single figure, but dispersed across institutions and discourses. Analytical synthesis, the evolution of resistance. Across this historical and literary context, several patterns emerge. First, the figure of the king evolves from a literal monarch to a symbolic representation of unaccountable power. Second, resistance consistently invokes the principle of legitimacy, that authority must be justified and accountable. Third, protest functions as a collective performance of sovereignty, asserting the agency of the people. Finally, literature serves as both a mirror and a catalyst, reflecting societal tensions while also shaping political consciousness. Conclusion, a tradition that continues. The No Kings protests of today are thus part of a much longer tradition, one that spans over 2 millennia. From the assemblies of ancient Athens to the streets of modern cities, the struggle against concentrated power has remained a central feature of human political life. What has changed is not the core idea, but its expression. The king may no longer wear a crown, but the question remains the same. Who holds power and on what terms? As long as this question persists, so too will the impulse to resist, to declare, in whatever form necessary, that sovereignty belongs not to rulers, but to the people.